This is Podcast Portugal with Justin West, and I want to extend a really big welcome to Juniour. I'm super interested to hear a little bit about what you do, where you come from, and to talk quite a lot about surfboards as well, because I think it's going to be super interesting for Podcast Portugal listeners and also for my Justin West coaching surfing clients. Juniour, welcome.
Thank you, Justin. Nice to hear from you. Full name Saman Christopher Hewawitharana. That's Hewawitharana's from Sri Lanka, where my dad's from. It's funny, when we were growing up, he told us it meant because I think there was always a bit of, because my mum's from UK, so there was always a bit of a conflict of like which country you want to represent more, whether you want to represent UK or Sri Lanka. And having this Sri Lankan name, I think he wanted us to feel really proud of it. So he told us it meant soldiers of the king.
Oh, wow.
Later on in life, we found that was a made-up story. But it's quite funny because one of my ancestors was when the transition of Ceylon, old Ceylon, becoming an independent country. It was one of my ancestors that actually went to the UK Parliament and petitioned for the more Buddhist representation in the government, because after the British left, they kind of had set up a system that was very biased to a minority race. Well, it's part of what created a lot of the problems. But yeah, anyway, so one of my relatives was out there in the British Parliament speaking to all the House of Lords and stuff, petitioning for a fairer system in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, because the troubles in Sri Lanka, I went there a few times. The first time must have been in the 90s at some point, and I was in the very south. I think it was Midigama or somewhere like that, or Weligama.
Yeah.
And I took a taxi, or it was like a little minibus kind of thing. And I really wanted to go to Arugam Bay. You know, the sea was sort of happening on that side. And I really wanted to go over there because I'd heard so much about it. And it was so hard to find a driver. I wanted to travel at night so I could sleep on the bus, wake up the next day, and they were going, oh, no, there's no way we're going to drive over there during the night. But luckily I found one guy who was pretty prepared to do it. And we kind of went on quite a long route a little bit more through the center. And took a few days to do it because he didn't really want to go at night, but it was a cool experience. And actually, when we got to Arugam Bay, it was an amazing place. And I think there'd been some problems because they only had fish and rice in the town at the time. And there was hardly any tourists. I don't think there was any tourists there. Maybe I saw like 4 people or something like that. And I ended up playing a lot of cricket in the streets with the local guys. It was really cool.
Yeah.
And when I left there was a big bomb went off in the police station, which was kind of insane. And then on the way, we went via Kandy and back to the airport. And then there was some trouble at the airport as well. So, but these days the troubles have subsided quite substantially, right? I think I went recently and we literally went from the airport straight down the center to the south. They put a new road in and it was completely different.
Yeah, it's actually I used to go to Arugam Bay a lot, probably just after you had been there, a couple of years after you, and I used to spend my summers out there like 2 or 3 months at a time, living in like a little fisherman's hut kind of style, right on the beach.
Yeah.
And just surfing every day for months at a time, and eating the local food, which is actually amazing.
Yeah.
There. But it was in the Civil War, so that kind of kept the tourists down, the level of tourism down, which obviously from a personal surfing point of view was amazing. Maybe not so much for the locals trying to make a living out there, but it was the waves were phenomenal, and there was quite a few of the points apart from the main point. You've got 3 or 4 other ones in and around there, and they kind of back onto, well, Yala Safari Park is like the biggest national park in Sri Lanka, and some of the breaks kind of back onto the end of that park. So you're literally like walking through jungle to get to the points and stuff, and passing elephants
Yeah.
and seeing crocodiles and all kinds of crazy stuff. But surfing amazing waves and yeah, but it was a bit of a sketchy time, and actually, to be fair, Arugam Bay was fairly stable because they had was surrounded by special task force bases.
Oh yeah.
So the actual town, because there were a special task force, they were like weren't like your regular army. They were pretty well trained. Um, so the actual town, because there was so much of a military presence there, there wasn't too much troubles in those actual towns around the coast. But they had like quite strict policies. There would be like security checkpoints before entering and exiting the town, and at a certain time of night they would just close them, so you couldn't even get in or out. So you'd had to plan your travel like in the day and all those kind of things. But I actually remember surfing one of the points out there called Crocodile Rock, and it's about it was I don't know how it is now, but it was like a 2 kilometer walk on this sandy beach, and it's got this like huge like yeah huge rock with a tree coming out of it and this perfect little sandy right hand point break wrapping around and I remember surfing there having a little break and like all of a sudden like five dudes come running over the hill with like massive machine guns and stuff like in in flip-flops and t-shirts. So I actually thought they were terrorists. I was like shitting myself like, oh wow, are we gonna get and but it's actually the special task force on a training thing, but they were just running around with these like looked like anti-aircraft guns in flip-flops and shorts. And the guy in charge, the sergeant or whoever he was, he was like, "Oh, you're a surfer, you're good at swimming. Let's have a swimming race." And I had to swim out against this guy.
So
I
that
didn't let him.
so those guys were predominantly Buddhist, were they? And so and not to the history of Sri Lankan troubles. It's my ignorant knowledge of it. It was that you had some a different religious grouping that came over with the tea plantations, thanks to the British, I think, wasn't it? They
Yeah, yeah,
imported a
that
lot of
that was
cheap labor. I
yeah,
think they were
yeah.
from Hindu or one of the castes.
Tamil Nadu,
The
the
Tamils. Okay, that's right. Tamil
Tamil
Tiger.
Nadu.
Yeah, that's right.
There
Then,
was
which
yeah,
kind of came a little bit more the north and east coast, right? And then there's
yeah,
kind of a lot of. I noticed there was a lot of Muslim and sort of Muslims on the in the fishing town, like Arugam Bay. I remember speaking to like a guy that owned literally the sort of point there. He had like a little place where he sold water and looked after your keys. And he was Muslim, and he said
yeah.
like I said, "Wow, this spot here, you could do something amazing, like have a little restaurant or some surf camp or something." He said, "No, I don't want to do anything here. If I don't if I don't make anything here, they can't take anything off me."
Yeah, no, it's
That
true.
always
There
stuck
was a
with
lot of
me.
that.
Yeah, but what's the history of the trouble there, just from an inside?
So it's not there was yeah there was a divide between the Tamils and the Sinhalese. Sinhalese are the majority population in Sri Lanka, and the Tamils migrated from Tamil Nadu in South India. A lot of them, like you say, were brought over by the British to work in the tea plantations
Mm,
because the originally they wanted the Sri Lankans to Sinhalese to work there, but the conditions were so poor. I think it was just kind of like a step above slave labor, and the Sinhalese refused to work there. So the British solution was to import loads of untouchables, like the lowest caste
right.
from India and Tamil Nadu, and bring them to work in and have them in very very subhuman conditions working there. So that kind of created like these two separate groups. But then I think, I mean, I don't know all the technicalities, but from basic, when Sri Lanka then gained independence, I'm not sure how much the Sinhalese actually did to improve the conditions of the Tamils and give them fair representation in government and obviously deciding policies and all that. So then you had a conflict between the majority Sinhalese and a minority group. But saying a minority, there was enough of them to that they needed to be fairly represented and have a say in how the country was run and all those kind of stuff. So you had this group of people that were, yeah, they just didn't have enough rights, and the Sinhalese people in governments and stuff didn't do enough for those people to keep them happy and make sure they were getting looked after as well. It was a pretty horrific war. I remember
Went on
going
for a long
to,
time, right? Went on
yeah,
for
30
Tat for a
years.
long time. Yeah.
30
And
years, yeah, yeah.
how did they sort it out? I really don't. I just remember suddenly hearing there's a ceasefire, and then we didn't hear
Yeah.
much.
Well, to be honest, I think in these kind of conflicts, there's so much hate that gets involved on both sides, that to come to like a resolution is, so in some cases almost impossible. So, and we had a very hardline government, and they just kind of wiped out the actual core terrorist group. They kind of wiped them out. They just went up in a massive military operation and just destroyed all the kind of resistance there. And so the ceasefire came about in that way. And then I think slowly hopefully the people are being better once the conflict was finished, then they could actually focus on rebuilding, just like rebuilding, working together, and actually, because historically the Tamils and the Sinhalese have worked and lived alongside each other for many hundreds of years, and there hasn't been a conflict. You know, it's not the conflict hasn't. It's not like it's not like an ethnic thing. It was more like that they just weren't given they weren't given they weren't looked after basically,
Yeah.
and yeah, yeah.
Well,
But
yeah.
thankfully, yeah, that all resolved. And then Sri Lanka was looking really good. But then Sri Lanka managed to vote in the biggest bunch of thieves, like a whole family of thieves,
Yeah.
and
Is that why
they
your
were.
family moved to Scotland, or what? How did you guys? Was it your great grandfather or grandfather or father, or how did you guys decide to your your
I
paternal
guess,
line, they decided to come to Scotland, right?
yeah. So my dad met my mum in Heriot-Watt University in Scotland.
Yeah.
And so when Ceylon transitioned to independent country, like the government that came in, literally overnight turned the schools from speaking English into Sinhalese, which was like obviously fair. You know, Sinhalese is the national language, but from my dad's point of view, it meant like one day he was going in to do his O levels in English, and the next day it was now in Sinhalese, a completely different language. So from education point of view, it was very difficult for them. And luckily, my grandfather, his father was I mean, he started off with nothing, but became a very successful businessman involved in buying and selling fish, amongst other things. But so he was very wealthy. And so all of his kids, all of the boys anyway,
Hmm.
he sent to the UK to complete their education. So then they could obviously continue their education in the language that they'd studied in from the start.
Yeah. And was there
Um,
some kind of program as well that's set up by the UK to help that transition with Ceylon?
I don't, obviously there was the colonial connection between Sri Lanka and the UK, but I'm not
Ceylon
sure.
was a former, was it a colony?
Colony, yeah,
Part
yeah,
of the
was,
British Empire? Okay.
yeah, part of the Commonwealth. Um, yeah, so my dad was at university and met my mum there, and they'd always had a great respect for the Scottish education system in general. It's slightly different from the English education system. We do one less, well, you can do one less year at school and an extra year at university, which kind of makes a lot of sense because I don't know, at school you generally know less of what you want to do, and at university, hopefully, you have a better idea of what you want to do. Um, so our education in Sri Lanka was we went to an international school where they spoke English, and it was okay. It was mediocre. Like I think if you were diligent like my brother, you could learn in any environment. I wasn't quite as diligent as my brother, let's say. So I was kind of messing around more than educating myself. So they decided to My brother went to school in Scotland first, and then I followed him a couple of years later. More so, if we did want to go on and get higher education, we were set up in Scotland with their education system to do that more easily, rather than trying to apply to a different education system. Yeah, so
Yeah.
those was the main reason we ended up there.
Cool. And then you went on to university there and you studied, what's it, mechanical engineering, is that right?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, we did finished like school, like I did my highs and actually ended up doing sixth form. Not that I was kind of because in the Scottish system, the hires is what you apply to university after when you get your hires results,
Mm.
and then you can actually leave and go to university if you get accepted. And then generally, you do sixth form if you didn't get the results that you wanted, and you need
Okay.
to redo some or add on some, or maybe you just want to do an extra year at school.
Mm.
So in my case, I remember it's a UCAS form. I don't know what it's called these days, but so you've got a deadline to fill that in by, and the teachers are hassling me, oh, you haven't filled in your UCAS form. And I was like, yeah, that's because I have no idea what I want to do. And there's all those careers advices and stuff that I didn't actually go and chat to anyone. And I was actually my deputy headmaster, who was also my rugby coach one day. I think I'd been pulled in to see him. I think I must have done something wrong. But then we got off that topic and onto my UCAS form sheet and kind of convinced me that I needed to fill it out. And I had the results like from the hires were kind of really pointing towards this like engineering side of education. And my dad was a chemical engineer, and he would always kind of like that was the direction that he wanted us to go. So I just kind of filled out that form to get the teachers off my back and my parents off my back, basically. And then a couple of months later, or however long it takes, I can't remember. I had unconditional offers from all the universities that I had applied to.
Cool.
And then it was just a matter of like you got the doors are open. In those days, you had like grant systems, so the fees was covered, and the student loans system, so a lot of your expenses were covered. So it was kind of like a no-brainer, and people are always selling the university life as the best time of
Mm.
your young adulthood or whatever. So yeah, it's kind of like
Yeah. And so
following.
how did you get from there into to the Algarve and making surfboards?
Yeah, a couple of different steps, I guess, for sure. So studying mechanical engineering made me realize that something there was so I kind of my strengths were in the more hands-on parts of our course, but there was so much theory and stuff like I don't know if you've ever studied any kind of thermodynamics and fluid mechanics,
No.
but it's really difficult and it's
Yeah.
really boring. And
Yeah.
those that
There
combination
is
of
there is a reason why there's a big demand for engineers.
yeah, yeah, it's really
Not
hard
a lot of
and
people
like
can do it.
unless yeah, if you need to be interested in it, and that was my problem. I'd kind of filled out that form just under pressure without really thinking about what I wanted to actually get educated in. And I ended up doing a course that I wasn't that interested in.
Mm.
And to be honest, like to do well at it, you needed to be interested in it because it was difficult. So I went and I did 3 years of university. The degree was four, so I left with like an ordinary degree, with a definite with a firm decision that I never wanted to be an engineer. Just wasn't what I wanted to do, and I ended up actually working in a well, I did a whole bunch of stuff, man. I went to Greece as a DJ and a sailing instructor, and then ended up in Norway working in like a very technical companies operating robots and stuff, and ended up finally in Scotland working in a surf and snowboard shop.
Oh, yeah,
And that was
what was the name of that?
boardwise, just
Okay.
behind the car. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It was right in this. It was in the really cool Lady Lawson Street behind the castle. Yeah, it was. I mean, Edinburgh. I don't know. Edinburgh for me was like a great city
Mhm.
to to spend time in. Well, you have it's one of the only places like well on the East Coast there. So like 40 minutes from the town, you've got like surf breaks,
Hmm.
and an hour 45 or say 2 hours, you can be, I'm not going to say mountains because they're hills. You can be in the hills
Yeah.
snowboarding. So, I like obviously we had a lot of very poor conditions, but I remember one year I had a very enthusiastic manager who was enthusiastic when it came to surfing. He would mark up all the days that we surfed. And one day, and one year, we surfed 200 days out of the year.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. I mean, the cool thing about it is we traveled a lot, we'd look at the forecast, and if there was a forecast on the North Coast, we'd drive up like after work on a Saturday, and it's a 5 hour drive.
Yeah.
And like the last hours are through single track roads with deer jumping out at you and all kinds of crazy shit. So we'd drive up after work on a Saturday, like sleep in our cars in minus whatever conditions, and then get up and surf literally all day, three sessions a day, and then drive back down and then be at work on in the Monday. Probably pretty useless at a job, to be fair, after all that. But but the cool thing was, we traveled around all around that coast of Scotland, like the west coast, north
Mhm.
coast, northeast, and it's for me, it's still. I mean, I've seen quite a few places now, but like that part of those bits of Scotland is so stunning,
Yeah.
and you can drive through like just such beautiful bits of the country and not even see a car for half a day.
Mm.
And like obviously chasing surf, but like the way to the beach was stunning. Yeah, so I got into surfing through the shop really,
Yep.
working there, and
Is
then
the
we
first
started.
time you picked up like a surfboard and felt the weight and felt, looked at the curves, and
It's
was there
funny,
a
before, so actually, to be honest, my first surf was in Portugal. At the time, I was windsurfing because the shop we were snowboarding, surfing, skating, and windsurfing, and I got hired for my windsurfing knowledge at the time. And we dabbled in surf. We literally used to take our roof rack straps and put them around the back strap off our windsurf boards and try and surf on them when we went down the beach and there was no wind, but there was like a swell. So, uh, but but it was just yeah, I don't know if you could call what we did surfing,
wow,
but
getting in the ocean with a board? And I think it's kind of similar to how I started, actually, a little bit like that. In Saudi Arabia, we had always a bunch of old windsurf boards that people had come, they'd lived in Saudi, then they just bailed and they just left all their equipment like in
yeah.
the sun in the dunes there, just getting all wrecked. We used to take them out, paddle them around. If there was a little wave, we would be trying to surf it, or
Mm.
otherwise we'd be like following dolphins and stuff like that. It was awesome. Yeah, in
So
those days it wasn't such a big thing. You couldn't really find out too much about surfing, like it was.
no,
You might have a magazine a month, and
yeah,
you really had to be in the clique of surfers, especially UK, and even more so probably in Saudi. Like it wasn't like living in Hawaii or California or Australia where there was a little bit more media and stuff going on.
yeah, no, nothing like that. So, but like the first legitimate surf, I would say, was in Portugal, and I had a girlfriend, and we'd splitting up, and then she traveled out to Albufeira to spend the summer here. And I think she called me like halfway through a holiday and asked me to come out and see her for a week. And we ended up getting back together and staying. And she was one of those chicks that could lie on the beach and sunbathe, and that's not really my thing. So I was trying to figure out what to do with my time there. And I was working in this bar, and I looked up on the wall behind the bar, and there was a surfboard like drilled into the wall. I think it was like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and I said to the owner of the bar, like, "Oh, how much would you sell that surfboard?" And she was like, yeah, how much you want to buy it for?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know, $30." So she was like, "Sold." And so she ripped this thing off the wall and handed it to me. And I walked out the bar. It must have been like 2 or 3 in the morning, whatever. and I bumped into a girl from my university, Lucy, and she was like, "What the hell are you doing here?" And I was like, "Oh, I work here, and I'm gonna try and learn how to surf." And she was like, "No way, I have a Portuguese boyfriend that works a couple of bars down the road who's actually looking to find someone to surf with because he can't afford the fuel to go down." So I literally took this thing off the wall, walked out the bar, and got a ride to the beach. And she took me down to her boyfriend Miguel and introduced me. And then literally that morning, so we both had like night jobs. So I'd finish at 3. He finished even later. So we'd basically go straight from the bar, like to his car, and we'd drive down the beach. And that was back in the day before there was a highway. So you'd do like all the 125 all the way from Albufeira to the west coast. It was good. I was gonna say an hour and a half, 2 hour drive
Yeah.
back in those days because he had one of those tiny little Portuguese, the car that Ali used to have.
Is it Renault? Is it a
Yeah,
Renault
that piece of
modified?
crap thing, like
They
with the
call it the
handy.
Portuguese 4x4.
Yeah, they love it here. But yeah, so he had one of those, and we'd drive to the beach like literally every other day because we couldn't do it every day. It was too tiring. But so we'd go straight from the bars down to the beach, and he was like it was no surf schools or anything in those days, and he'd just be like, "Oh, okay, cool, like yeah, just follow me," and he'd disappear because he could actually surf, and I didn't know, I didn't have a clue what I was doing, and most of the time I didn't even make it out the back. I remember actually making out the back one day, one of the bigger days, and like seeing the shock on his face. He's like, "Shit, you made it out." Okay, try and catch. I remember, obviously, wasn't a crowd in those days, but there was still like people surfing. And I just remember like sitting waiting in the lineup. Or what was the line? I didn't know at the time what a lineup was, but and just waiting for my wave, and I would just literally wait till no one paddled. Like you could see a wave coming, and then like, oh, no one's going for this one. Okay, this one must be mine. Obviously, it was the closeouts, so I'd basically just get catch closeouts. That was how I went to surf. We got smoked. And I think in 3 months of surfing every other day, I think I literally caught one wave or actually rode along it. It didn't help that the board that I had bought off the bar was like a 7 foot gun with tiny dimensions with like as much rocker as a Turkish slipper.
A couple of holes in it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I filled them up with chewing gum. That
Yeah.
was my remedy for that. Um, Yeah, and then I got to the point where I thought, okay, I just don't have the skill for surfing,
Mm.
and came back and working in the shop. And then one of the boys took me out at our local break and gave me his longboard, and I think I literally caught like 40 waves in an hour.
Nice.
And and I was just like, I can surf, and I just remember being like, yes, I can surf. Okay, and then the next day I went and bought a longboard,
Mm.
and that's it. And I surfed a longboard for 3 years straight in everything.
Yeah, that's interesting because, like, does that sort of, I know you now have a really good business making surfboards, and it
Hmm.
seems like you followed your passions, and maybe the way you design your boards is kind of is stem from that experience where somebody gave you a slightly different board shape and suddenly opened the opportunity for many more waves. Do you
It's
think that?
definitely, yeah. I mean, if you're not catching waves, there's not much point in being out in the water surfing anyway. You can go for a swim or if you like, but if you want to surf, you need to be catching waves. Otherwise, it's not much fun. Um, but yeah, it's so I don't know. It's just very different now because you have all the schools and the foamies and forecasts, which are very easy to read.
Mm,
When we started, there was in Scotland, probably like 12 to 15 surfers, and you knew every single face. And
mhm,
you look at the isobaric charts to figure out where if there was going to be a wave or not.
mm.
Whereas now everything's very accessible, very easy. All the beaches are known, all those kind of things, way more
Yeah,
accessible.
I have Google pins dropped on them.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think there's all kinds of crazy chat groups going, go there, go here,
Yeah.
go there.
Yeah. Just one of the biggest differences it makes to my surf coaching clients. Um, I see it very often, and you see it down the beach with the general surfing population quite often. Many people are just on the wrong type of surfboard. I also get clients asking me, like, you know, what surfboard can I use that can will be my main surfboard. And one of the biggest messages that I can give them, and I consistently give everybody, is a few things. Like, firstly, quiver. You need a lot of surfboards. And one surfboard is never going to do everything that you want. It's going to do
No.
everything like an average. So get as many boards as you can, try as many different boards as you can. And the second thing I always tell everybody is build a consistent and long-term relationship with your shaper. Don't go and necessarily just pick a board out of the shelves because you think it looks nice. You know, maybe you can do that. Pick a board out of a shop, have a go on it, ride it, and then take that surfboard to your local shaper and say, look, this board did this in these ways, this board did that in those ways. And hopefully you'll find a really good shaper who'll take the dimensions, will start to try to work out something about your stance and all those kind of things. And literally, what product these days can you go along to a factory and say, well, can you make this board exactly right for me, please? It doesn't really happen in any other industry, I don't think. And it just drives me crazy that more people don't take that opportunity, especially now. It's, the people buy surfboards online, they buy surfboards all over the place. But like, if you're going to be like all the pros do it, all the best surfers in the world, they'll have shapers either in different towns or they have a main shaper that organizes all of their boards. Um, and it doesn't cost any more money, right? In fact, in some cases, it's probably cheaper than buying it retail. Um, so what would be your advice to the surfing population out there? How would you, not trying to sell your services too much, but it just makes sense, right?
I think I think the key is the concept of the custom surfboard has maybe got lost a little bit with when you go into a shop, like everything you see there on the rack that's made out of that's been whatever shaped and made out of fiberglass and stuff like that is considered a custom board. But my concept of a custom board is well, I think it's probably what it originally was, which is a surfboard specifically designed to suit your customer, the person that's buying that board, designed to suit how they surf, where they're surfing, um, taking into account all those kind of things like how fit are they, how much time are they getting in the water every week, are they going on a surf trip, where are they going, all those kind of like the whole customizing something for me is like making it fit that person. So if I make you a surfboard like and you really love it, that doesn't mean you give it to the next guy and he's gonna love it because he's probably gonna need something different. Um, and that concept of custom surfboard to me is like the key to unlocking the right board for you. A lot of times when the problem is obviously the surf industry needs to sell boards, and so they've like through whatever magazines and social media and advertising and stuff, they've convinced a lot of the public that their products are the best, and they might be the best thing for professional surfers on tour surfing at a very high level. Um, but most of your surfers are pretty are surfing on nowhere near this level, and we need something that suits the way that we're surfing and the waves that we're also surfing. So, and I think that's unless you know a lot about surfboards, which probably your average customer, even though they might think they know a lot about it, to actually know the right details to, well, you can see when you go down the beach, like you say, most people are on the wrong surfboard. So that means that they either have the wrong information or they've convinced themselves that that's the board that they need. Whereas really, like you're saying, the best thing you can do is create a relationship because that's what I find making a surfboard is like you start a conversation with someone. They come and go, "Hey, these are the ways I surf. This is what I surf," and then I would like they have like I want to surf like this or whatever. And so you start, and then you make them the first board, and that's like the opening of the conversation. And then they'll come back to you in 6 months or a year or 2 years or whatever and be like, oh, I really like the board in these conditions, but it didn't serve so well in those conditions. Now, can you make me something for those conditions? And then over the years, like you say, you develop this understanding with that person of what they're looking for in a surfboard, where they're surfing. I know those kinds of details are really important.
Mm.
And also, like you say, the understanding of there isn't one surfboard that can surf all conditions. For sure, if you're talented enough, you can surf one board in most conditions. But
Mm.
what you're going to find is there's a window of surf that that board really excels in. And outside of that window, it's possible to surf it, but it's not far from ideal in some cases.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
you need to have a.
I learned kind of a little bit about, so at one point I think I had 30 surfboards. I had a
Yeah.
that was
More
my
than me.
that was my
I'm a shape.
ultimate quiver. Yeah, it was my ultimate quiver. At the time I was working for Adrian Phillips and Fluid Juice Surfboards down in St. Mirren. And yeah, I was selling surfboards basically. So I'd have a lot of people coming in saying, what do I need? Da, 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 da. And I was like, well, the best way for me to learn it would be just to try as many boards as I can, so I can try to get some kind of information and real time data, like what do these boards do. And yeah, I mean, I had 30 surfboards. Some were from the 80s, some were like, and we kind of we went from making in those days, I think Adrian was shaping maybe 2-3 boards a week, and they're all high performance thrusters.
Yeah.
Maybe he'd give a little bit of volume, a little bit more width, maybe a bit more length to a few customers, but it was pretty much high performance thruster, a mini mile, which was your sort of beginner learner board type kind of thing, and then longboards, which were either towards the classic single fin or a little bit more sort of high performance. That was the kind of set range. And I was looking around his shaping room, and I had to go shaping a couple of boards, but I was absolutely terrible. I had no patience whatsoever with
Okay.
the tools. No
Yeah.
patience at all. But what I did find super interesting was he had a lot of templates, and Adrian was very meticulous. He used to always take a lot of measurements. He had rail templates, and so whenever a board would come in and people would be like really, really impressed by it, he would measure as much as he could, with just
Yeah.
tape measure and make templates.
Yeah.
And I found this really cool template of a fish. And it actually, I don't, because he was working in Australia. I don't remember who he was working for, but when he was in the early days in the 70s, he was working for somebody up there. I want to say it was a Mark Richards. I think it might have been a Mark Richards twin fin. But
Yeah.
anyway, it was like a template. And I was like, what is this? He goes, there's something I picked up in Australia. I think it was Mark Richards' twin fin of this and this and that. I said, why? Make me one, make me one.
Mm.
He goes, yeah. I said, yeah, but make me one, but make it with like kind of a little bit more modern rocker and, you
Yeah.
know, and I had to go on that. And it was actually a twinny. And I was like, wow, okay, this is something we can start to sell.
Yeah.
Um,
This is fun, basically.
Yeah, it was something that was much easier to catch waves. The volume of waves went up. Therefore, like the more repetition you get, the more practice
Yeah.
you get, the more you can try new things, the more speed you have entering into
Yeah.
the wave. So that turn makes your turns a little bit more easy to do. And yeah, it was a big mind opening moment. And I've noticed from a lot of your boards, you have quite a few different plan shapes, and I've noticed following you on Instagram as well as seeing your boards in quite a few shops. You have some wingers and some channels and some different bottom contours, certainly some interesting tail shapes. Um,
Yeah.
but how did you kind of get to that sort of point?
I think I was very lucky. I went and lived in Australia for a year, and I was kind of like kicking around looking for a job. And I'd had some experience of shaping and stuff before I'd been there. I'd worked with a local shaper here in Portugal, a big wave surfer, actually, Billy.
Ah, yeah.
Um, and I used to work with him, helping on the vans and then doing his ding repairs and then eventually sanding his board. So I was always kind of like in the mix of that kind of stuff. And he actually gave me, when he left Yalgov, he gave me his shape room in Sagres, and I took that on. And so he had all like thousands of, not thousands, but hundreds of templates, and he basically started surfing when I was born in 1977 in Portugal, in North Portugal. And back in those days, there was no like local shapers or anything, and his dad had a wood yard. So they actually built the first surfboards they ever surfed. They built out of wood
No way.
from his dad's like lumber yard. And so every surfboard this guy had pretty much surfed his whole life had been something that he had built.
Mm.
Very, very like core hand shaping skills, and that's kind of like was my entry into actual
Yeah. I
shaping.
had a 7.6
Uh,
gun from Billy. Like it was super
mm,
drawn into the tail.
mm.
I think it was like designed for kangaroos, you know?
He'd spent quite a lot of time in Hawaii and met some shapers and stuff out there. And obviously his passion when it came to surf was in the big powerful waves. That's where he actually excelled surfing. Now he lives in Madeira and surfs still surfing Jardim do Mar when it's 5 meters plus. Um, but yeah, if you got like I always used to say, even say to this day, like if someone comes and wants like a gun, I'm like, I'll go get Billy to shape you one. He'll do a much better job. Because that's I always find that with shapers, you know what, they're passionate about surfing. They often become very good at making because their understanding of how that board works is on another level to something that they don't surf regularly. But so that was kind of like my introduction to shaping. But so well, yeah, back I went out to Australia for a year and I happened to get a job. I had a couple of surfboards with me that I'd shaped, and I walked into this surfboard factory and I showed the guy actually who I met was actually the owner, and I'd showed him these boards and I was like, oh, this is what I do. This is what I can do. Have you got any work for me? And he was like, yep. When do you want to start? And so I ended up working for this um, basically family of surfboard makers that have been making surfboards for 40 years. Um, and from back in the day when you used to have to make all your own fins and all that kind of stuff. So I worked for this. It was a dad and his two sons. And that's basically what they did. They've been making surfboards their whole lives. And so I got to work with them for a year, and that was kind of like me going back to university, to be honest, because they had like all the modern skills. They used some of the shapes were shaped in machines. Most of the stuff they did was hand shaping, but then yeah, they would make up slabs of fiberglass to cut fins and stuff, and they had a huge range of boards that they had in their showroom from like old school, like complete like boards with no planing surfaces, these displacement crafts,
Okay.
to like high performance surfboards and like they had everything, their own fins, and yeah, it was just so for me it was mad. It was like I was like a sponge in there. Like every day, was just you couldn't learn enough there. And the cool thing was because I was kind of like working under the table there, um, doing thousands of ding repairs. Oh my God, did so many ding repairs there. But part of their, because they always felt bad in a way that they couldn't afford to pay me more. They always like said I was quite a hard worker there, so and they would always be like, man, if you want to shape a board, just like grab something and go ahead. And so I was allowed to shape there for myself, and they wouldn't charge me anything. So yeah, pretty much every spare moment I had, I would just pick up a blank and start shaping it. And because like you're doing it, I wasn't doing it for money or anything. I was doing it for my own personal boards. So I've always been like, oh, I wonder how, like, how does something work? What do channels do in the board? So then you make a board with channels and you surf it, and then you
Okay.
understand how that works. And then, oh, what does a winger do? Oh, let's make a board with a winger, you know. And then like, oh, like I've got like an idea for a fin shape. Okay, so let's make a fin. So then you make a slab and like cut out your and shape your own fins. And that was yeah, and you just come up with these things, and in theory they shouldn't really work because you've gone so outside of like the standard shapes and stuff that work.
Mm.
But some of them just ended up being really magic boards.
Yeah. You take those
And
elements into the next one.
exactly, yeah, you say like, oh, that really worked. I love the way that feel in these conditions. Want like then you want something to feel like that, but in slightly different conditions, and then you try to alter your designs based on something, but then projecting into another kind of conditions. And then sometimes like the changes that you make, you're like, okay, that did exactly what I thought it would do. And sometimes you make changes and you're like, okay, no, that didn't work at all. That wasn't what I wanted at all. And so some of it you learn through what works, and obviously some of it you learn through what doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
I think
How do you think, like you were saying something about machine shaping and hand shaping, and what are the differences of those two techniques, and how much do you think like technology is going to play a role in the future of surfboards and surfboard making, in in terms of that sort of design innovation, like being able to analyze what works, and then is there a science-based methodology that you think could improve upon the sort of trial and error, like shaping and then surfing and shaping and surfing, or do you think that there's too much complexity and too many parts, too many moving parts
well,
for
I mean,
for anything to be?
nothing. Yeah, I don't know. Nothing's impossible. I think for my idea is like the actual crafting of a surfboard, the fundamentals. Like I would always say, if you come from a hand shaping background, even if you then move on to working with a machine, in my personal opinion, your boards are always going to be better made than someone that just works with machines. Because one thing when you're in the shape room and you're designing a board through templates and curves, your everything is if you lay down a template onto the board, you can physically see how one curve is interacting with another. And
Good.
whereas when you're on the computer, you're looking at a screen, so it's a very small image of the real thing. And also the hand shaping skills are way harder to get, I think, and take a lot more time and experience. So for me, from my personal thing, like what the machine shaping did for me was in my mind, in order to become a great hand shaper, I would have need to have been making thousands and thousands of boards. And I just didn't have the enough orders
Yeah.
to get good quickly enough. So working in Australia was amazing because I would be making, you'd be working on like 4 or 5 surfboards a day. So in 1 month, you get more experience of like of working with surfboards than you would like in a couple of years on your own. And I think this industry experience is really key to anyone that wants to be involved or become a shaper. It's like you need industry experience because you're never going to get the reps unless you're working with those bigger numbers. So for me, what like the machine shaping did, it took I consider my hand shaping skills fairly average, but with the machines, the precision and understanding of how once you get your head around the design program and how to manipulate those designs to get what you want, the precision of the machines combined with my shaping skills, I was able to make really good surfboards, whereas consistently very good surfboards. Whereas if I just hand shaped, it would have probably taken me another 15 years to get to the point that I've got to now. So if I see all these things as a tool, if you use them in the right way, like machine shaping for me is like it allows me to develop a much higher value product and a much better surfboard for my clients. Um, having come from a hand shaping background, that has given me obviously the basic, really good, solid fundamentals and understanding of the design process, which I think you really need. Um, People have this misconception that the machine does all the work, but the machine only cuts what you design. So if you design a shit surfboard, the machine will cut exactly that shit surfboard and it'll still be a shit surfboard. It doesn't make a shit design good. It just cuts that shit design very precisely.
Yeah.
Um, so like used
Interesting.
used in the right way. Um, there's lots of things. The really cool thing, there's a very powerful program. The way you can, so you can take data, like say if you really like an outline, like before like hand shaping, you would need to physically make a template of that. Um, and then use that template, then lay that on a blank and like draw that outline. Now, like you can do it with images. If you have a good enough image of a surfboard, you can take a picture of it. And obviously, you're not going to get an exact copy of that surfboard, but I kind of prefer it like that. So you can take a picture of something and that'll give you, and then you can transfer that picture onto the program. So you can get like you can get the idea of that curve and then make your own adjustments and influences. So basically, any surfboard that's out there online that there's a picture of, it's now you can use that information to influence and create your own designs.
That's interesting.
So yeah, you have like it's like all of a sudden you've got like a unlimited library of information there that you can now apply to your surfboard designs. Whereas before, like you say, your shaper would have to take all of those measurements, and that's important. I still do that when I have a surfboard that a client really likes, or a surfboard that comes to the shop that I really love the look of. I will take all those measurements and log them in. I will actually go and physically design that board on my program.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
but
good.
I've done that. Yeah, yeah. It's just but it's again, it's a tool.
Yeah.
It's not
I was trying to
yeah,
rack my brains. I was thinking the other day, like, how could AI and surfboard shaping somehow have some kind of relationship? Like you're talking about like how a plan shaped curve, you see it, you feel it, you can put it into the machine or you put it into the computer program. And I'm wondering how much that computer program, if there was some kind of AI involved, would then sort of say, well, on average, this curve, this plan shaped curve would suit this type of rocker or this type of
yeah.
ta- tail shape, or it pulled in a little bit more in the tail. But I'm just trying to think like that's an awful huge amount of data. And then how even with the even with the most amazing AI systems, how they're going to understand how that surfboard interacts with a wave. It's like
Yeah, I think that's it would be nice to be able to like say if you did like a say like you did like something simple like a single concave, but like where do you start that concave? Where do you finish that concave? How far out to the rails do you take that concave? How deep do you make that concave? And if there was like an AI system that could tell you like optimize it, like okay, the you need it like 4 mil deep,
it give you
whatever,
some
however.
parameters.
Yeah, like if you make it in this area, the board should function better. But then if you think, like you say, like how do they get that information? Because every single wave you surf is a different shape. Every single surfer
It
is
applies
is a
pressure in different ways and
yeah, and
different.
they're different shape. The foot shapes are different. The foot sizes are different. The body weight's different. The muscular structure is different. I mean, how can you then say this board is better for one person than another one because they surf in a completely different way? So there's always going to be, I think, like a slightly unquantifiable variable
Yeah.
that's very hard to kind of put then into definite parameters, which I think then kind of reverts back to the importance of having a custom shaper that you work with, that you've invested time and effort. That is more valuable than any technology
Mhm.
you can put into a surfboard. Is that like any kind of relationship, is how you communicate. The better you communicate, the better result you end up with. And the same with surfboards. If your shaper really understands how you surf and what you need, then he's got a much higher chance of making you a great surfer. And I found that personally, like it's quite funny because a couple of years ago, a really good friend of mine, Tomas, Tomas Alcobir,
Yep. Yep.
absolute shredder, and I first met that kid in a couple of months after moving here, and he was just like I don't know, like a 12
Little
or
Grom.
13-year-old little Grom, like quiet guy. But even at 12 years old, he was already surfing better than me. And you watch this kid and the amount of hours that, now I'm what, 47 now. So if you imagine, I've surfed with this kid for like over 30 years, pretty
Mm.
much. Um, and then so when this kid comes up to you and asks you for a surfboard, you have thousands of hours, or you've seen him do something so many hundreds of times that you kind of understand. You have a better understanding of what he needs. And I ended up making him, because he was like in between sponsors, because he's been sponsored for a long time now. But he was in a year where he didn't have a sponsor, and then so he approached me, and I made him a surfboard, and he ended up like really loving it and absolutely shredding the shit out of it, and took it all over. I was very surprised it lasted, because I was like, okay, yeah, he's gonna break this in 6 months, but he managed not to break it, or the board managed not to break. Probably should put it that way.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, it's just that kind of the understanding, because yeah, so making boards for that level of surfer is very intimidating.
It's
Because
quantifying the unquantifiable.
yeah, and
The
the only
unquantifiable. Yeah.
reason, like if I had another surfer of Tomas's level that I didn't know how they surf, like I don't know if I could have done as good a job as I did for Tomas.
Mm.
Like even though like the skills are obviously there because you can do it, but it's that kind of almost that intimate relationship you have with the person, um, through surfing. You understand what they need,
Yeah.
and I think that's really important for everyone. Is just to try to get a good relationship with a shaper, and then you'll probably find out couple of, even if it's not the very first surfboard they make you, if you stick with
Yeah.
it
It
and
takes
they
a
have a
while. Yeah. It
decent
takes a
amount of
while.
skill, you're going to get some magic boards out of that, out of it, for sure.
Yeah.
And if you're lucky, there'll all be magic if the guy's very good at what he does, guy or girl. So.
Well, sometimes you have to throw a couple of spanners in the works just to see if, there's like anything, just that little bit of evolution. So, you have just put something completely different in there and you might not like it, but then at least you have a data point.
Yeah, and I think also there's a lot of times, this is the good thing about shaping and surfing. Like obviously, I still surf as much as I can, which is not very much at the moment, but you can try all those weird and wonderful things on your own boards, and kind of get an understanding of how and what works, and maybe what things really don't work as well,
Yeah.
and so you can steer clear of a few of the traps, I guess.
Yeah.
But
Cool,
yeah.
man. Well, Juno, been absolutely amazing to talk with you. And tell me, can you tell the listeners where they can find you? I'm going to leave links in the show notes to your website, Junior Surfboards,
Mhm.
which is jnrsurfboards.com, and your IG, which is at Junior Fish, JNRFISH. But I'll leave the links in the show notes, and also on podcastportugal.com. Is there any other way? How can people find you? Should they sort of book an appointment to come talk to you, or how does
Yeah,
that
I mean,
go?
most of the, actually, I get a lot of people through Instagram just because that's the way they see. I've got quite a few boards up there.
Huh?
Um, I'm always happy to spend time talking about boards and stuff if you're interested in
Nice.
a custom board. You can also, yeah, they can send me. Yeah, probably Instagram is probably the safest way, the easiest. Everyone generally has it. If they don't have Instagram, then they can drop me a WhatsApp message or send
Great.
me an email through the website or something.
Okay. I'll put everything on there, and I'm going to post this also to the Justin West Coaching Instagram as well. So hopefully I'll keep trying to encourage my clients to look to building those relationships with their surfboard shapers. All right.
Yeah.
Great, man. I'd also like to say a big thank you and a big shout out to Band of Four for the support and the epic jingle. If you want to check out more of their music, I will leave a link in the show notes and as always on podcastportugal.com. Thanks, Juno.
No worries, man. Nice to hear from you.
Yeah, you too, man. Over and out.
Out.
6 feet under the rock I'm gone. I dig a hole and hide on my magazines. All the spots are not obscene. I just need some time, some focusing. I got the pen, I got the sheet, I got my plan, I got my screen. Someone tell me please the reasoning.